So I wanted to start a new vlog series where I'm talking about particular episodes of the Twilight Zone. One of the most popular videos on this channel is from a couple years ago. I did a top 10 favorite Twilight Zone episodes, and I also did 5 honorable mentions in that video. But in this, I'm kind of unofficially entitling it a Highlight Twilight Zone. And, I'm going to just talk about one particular episode. And compared to my top 10 favorite episodes, these are ones that I have not talked about before. A couple months ago during the holiday season, I talked about the basically Christmas episode of the Twilight Zone called Night of the Meek. So that is one, I guess, the unofficial first episode of this, but I'm just gonna kind of start over because that one's more of just a highlight episode, and I put that as part of my holiday horror vlog series. But yeah, the Highlight Twilight Zone. And this episode I want to talk about is season 2, episode 16, A Penny for Your Thoughts. And this one is a really neat idea on that phrase, a penny for your thoughts. And it's about a banker named Hector B. Poole. He's going to work on a typical morning. He goes to a newspaper stand, and the guy has like a little container that has change in it. And so he flips a coin and it goes in that, but it lands right on its edge. So it's neither heads nor tails. And the newspaper stand guy is like, wow, I bet you'll never see that again in a million years. So Hector doesn't think anything of it. And then before he goes, into the bank, he runs into one person and he hears them their mouth isn't moving, but he can hear their thoughts. And he ends up getting hit by a car, but it's not anything major. He doesn't get hurt really, but the guy who gets out of his car, he's just like, oh my gosh, tell me you're okay. And he's like, well, I don't feel any broken bones. I don't see any bruises or scratches on me. I think I'm okay. And then the guy says out loud to him, he's like, oh my gosh, because if I hurt you, I could never forgive myself. And and then in his thoughts, Hector hears him go, he's like, yeah, you took about 10 years off of my life, you idiot, or whatever. And so Hector's kind of baffled by this. He doesn't really come to terms that it's he can hear everyone's thoughts until he gets to the bank. And just a typical day at a bank, but the fact that you can read everyone's thoughts, you're going to have a very different experience of a typical day. And, a lot of things happen due to him being able to read people's thoughts. He learns that his boss is having an affair with some lady, he's cheating on his wife, and he's planning to take some weekend trip with, the girl that he's, dating behind his wife's back. There is, what is it? The security guy at the bank is doesn't hold a gun, and he can't wait until he can hold a gun. And there's one part of the episode where Hector is just like, do you plan on using the gun? And then he's like, yeah, why else would I want one? So there's that. And he has a coworker named Miss Turner, who you can tell she really cares about him and she has a crush on him, but she's not very expressive or very vocal about it. It's just he hears all the thoughts that she has about him, and you can tell that she really likes him and really cares about him, because anytime someone at the bank is kind of being condescending or whatever, she's always just like, Hector, you are so hardworking towards the bank and people really don't appreciate you, and things like that. And so the bad parts of this being able to read people's minds, Hector, of course, learns his boss is having an affair. He learns that there's a client of theirs that comes over and gets approved for a business loan, and tells one of Hector's coworkers, tells him, it's just make sure the paper's signed and then the check is made out. And then he's confirming these questions with the client, and he's like, so this is a business loan, are you expanding? And then the client is like, oh, that's right. But in his mind, he's like, that's wrong. He's like, I have this big plan to bet on, the horses and make double my money or whatever. And so, Hector's just still coming to terms with the fact that he can read people's thoughts. So he's saying these responses out loud, and everyone's looking at him like he's crazy. And so, but later in the episode, he also finds out that one of his coworkers, who's been a long loyal employee, and he's a little up there in age, Mr. Smithers, he has these thoughts that he's like, I'm gonna go to the vault at 4:30 every day like I always do, and I'm going to discreetly take money and then just walk out here with all this money and take a trip to Bermuda tonight or whatever. So Hector gets concerned. He brings this up to his boss. His boss ends up acting on it when it ends up being 4:30. So him and the security guys stop Mr. Smithers before he ends up leaving. And then he's like, all right, empty your contents of your bag. And then nothing's in there. It's just his typical, like, there's a sandwich, there's socks, there's, just like a booklet for like writing down stuff. And that's about it. And then he looks at his boss, Mr. Bagby, is just like, Hector. And then he's like, I'm fired, right? And he's like, yeah, clear out your desk. And so Hector goes over to Mr. Smithers to apologize to him. And, he tells him, I'm sorry. He's like, I really shouldn't have, barged in like that. And then Mr. Smithers kind of looking around, make sure no one's around to hear him, like, say this. And he's like, Hector, how did you know? Like, and he's like, you see, like, going to Bermuda or like, robbing the vault, and taking a trip to Bermuda is just like a dream of mine. He's like, have you ever had a dream like that? And he's like, yes, I have those thoughts of, wanting to rob the bank or get a bunch of money and be able to take, certain trips like to Fiji or whatever. But he's like, I guess I'm too set in my ways. That's just not me. I'm not a person that's just going to act upon that. And that's a really neat concept and theme of this episode, where it's like people have some really, strange thoughts sometimes that, if everyone did act upon their thoughts, it would be an even more chaotic world than it is now. And that's one thing thinking about this episode is I love the fact it's like, I've had a couple conversations like in my real life where people are like, oh man, I wish I could read people's thoughts and, know what others are thinking. I think this episode is a good example of why you shouldn't wish for that, because I would be driven crazy as well. Like, you wouldn't want to trust anyone. It's like having this, this power would be, a blessing, but mostly a curse. It's just like, Hector even says at the end of the episode, he's like, people are not what you think they are. But going on back to the episode, the rest of the episode, Mr. Smithers doesn't end up robbing the bank. And then before Hector is cleaning out his desk because his boss just fired him, Mr. Bagby comes out of his office, goes up to Hector, and it's just like, Hector, hang on a second. He's like, I found out that Mr. Sykes was down by, the horse races, and they just arrested him for gambling with company money. And Hector like says this at the same time that Mr. Bagby is telling him. And he's like, yes, I know. He's like, you should have believed me or whatever. And he's like, okay. He's like, all right, I'm sorry that, I doubted you on that and felt that you were just being outrageous about it. And so to kind of make up for it, his boss offers him his job back. And then, throughout this episode with Miss Turner, Hector, like, he really only trusts her, that he's like, I can read people's thoughts. And like, she's the only person that he felt like could believe him. And like, certain things that she was thinking, he was like saying back or responding back to her. And so when Mr. Bagby offers his job back, like Helen, or at the time she goes by Miss Turner, Hector like looks in her direction, and she's like, if you really care about your job, like, you're gonna stand up to him and tell him like what you really deserve, and that is, to be the head of accounts or whatever, and demand that there was this person who ended up leaving the bank, and there was just this empty office, and he's like, and demand that I take this person's office. So he ends up standing up to his boss and ends up telling him these things, and he's like, absolutely not. And then he like pulls him aside. He's like, all right, Mr. Bagby, let's get down to business. He's like, I know about you and Felicia, and clearly this is not your wife, and I know everything, that you're taking a trip this weekend with Felicia and all this. And so he kind of sabotages his boss and it's like, so, I don't want to reveal these things, but I do know about this. And so he gives him what he wants. And, Hector doesn't like sabotage him in like a really threatening way. He's just saying like, look, I know about your affair and, it's like you can't keep certain things from me or whatever. So I like that aspect that he used this ability to his advantage. And so at the very end of the episode, he ends up talking to Miss Turner, and then she's like, you can call me Helen. And so he's like, may I see you out, Helen? So Hector and Helen end up leaving the bank, and then the paper guy on the newspaper stand is like, get your late afternoon paper here. And so Hector walks over and throws another coin in that little basket thing, and it knocks the one that's standing on its edge over. And he's like, oh man, he's like, I've kept that up the whole day. He's like, and you just knocked it over. Oh wait, you're the same guy who threw that coin and it landed on its edge. He's like, hey, that's kind of crazy. And then so he's like, wait a second. And then he's like, listen. And then like he can't hear anyone's thoughts since he knocked the coin over. So I like this episode just based on its literal metaphor. And like, it's just a neat play on that. And, a lot of people are always like, oh, I wish I could read people's thoughts and know what they're really thinking. It's like a lot of times it's pretty ugly. The truth can be ugly. And, I'm good without knowing everyone's thoughts. So, and this episode is a good message for that. So if you ever are thinking, I really want to know people's thoughts, watch this episode. You might change your mind. I mean, I really like this episode, and I think it's a really solid Twilight Zone episode. It's definitely one of the better ones. There are some Twilight Zone episodes, of course, that are just kind of like whatever. But even their whatever episodes, it's not like, I'm not like straight up complaining that it's terrible. And, there's many shows nowadays where it's like, you can watch a show and like some, shows have amazing episodes and then they have bad episodes. And I mean, one example of that is my wife and I are currently watching The Walking Dead again. And it's like, there's some really amazing episodes of that series, and there's also some really, really bad episodes. So I'm going to leave it there for my highlight Twilight Zone, episode 1, A Penny for Your Thoughts. If you all have seen this episode, let me know what you think about it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, on this episode, not like just crazy general thoughts. And, luckily I can't read your mind. But if you like this episode, let me know. If you don't like this episode, let me know. But I'd love to hear what you think about it. So I'm going to leave it at that. My name is Brett, and hopefully this is the first of many. We'll see, based on anyone's feedback. If you like it, hopefully I can continue and highlight some more episodes. And because I at least have like 5 or 6 more I can highlight for now. But I definitely know with the show like the Twilight Zone, it'll definitely add to that. So thank you all for watching. I will see you in a future video. Bye.